we'll get underway. We've got, I think, just online. So, and I think Jill's coming as well, but we'll make a start anyway. So, Stephen, you're going to lead off.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and kia ora, councillors. Obviously, today's briefing is on the resident monitoring survey results. This is something that we do every year, and it provides us information in terms of residents' perceptions of the city, but also of council services. To help explain the results, and we've got quite a pack of info here, and we'll circulate this post the briefing. Obviously, everybody knows Baz, Marcus Downs, who's our lead researcher, and Christopher Stakowski, who's the team lead for the policy, the research team. So they're going to be helping us through the presentation. So if we go to the next slide, we've also got a lot of ground to cover, and the way that we're going to do this is basically at the chapter by chapter or section by section summary of the results, but we're not only showing those results but talk through possible drivers for the results, and probably more importantly what we're doing in terms of positive action within each of those areas. So what I'd suggest that we do is take each section as we go, stop for questions and a bit of discussion, and then move through the presentation. So I think it's really important just to remind councillors that this is just a feeder into the wider performance story. Obviously, if you look at that, the key performance indicators, 18 of the 93 are based on the results from the residents monitoring survey, and in terms of the wellbeing outcome indicators, 6 out of the 39 provide that kind of context. So it's an important part of the performance story, but it's only one part. So I'm going to hand over to Marcus, I think, who's going to just explain the background and the methodology, the timing, how we've gone about it. It's important context to understand.
Thanks, Stephen, and kia ora koutou. We'll just start off with the sort of background methodology of what the resident survey is. So got up on the screen there. Just a bit of information about it. The first thing is that this is a survey we conduct every year, the goal of it being to provide statistically representative results on, from residents of Wellington City about the council's services and perceptions of our city as well. This year's survey was conducted in February using our council research panel. So we took a random sample from that panel across 2 separate surveys, because the survey is quite large, so it's split into 2. So for part 1 we got about 800 or 809 respondents, and part 2 we got 862. So at that gives us a margin of error of 3.4 and 3.3% respectively for those 2 surveys. I've just got down the bottom there how that timeline, the survey timeline, overlaps with the COVID alert levels. So we were in red light level throughout the whole fieldwork period, and the parliamentary protest was going through. Pretty much overlapped with it entirely. So. But it's all the survey is always conducted around about February, March. So the first section we're going to run through is about city perceptions. So within the section, we've got some questions around city centre attributes, suburban attributes, and general Wellington perceptions. With respect to our city centre attributes, we've seen some of those, the performance on some of those shifting downwards over the past few years. In the suburban attribute space, they've been mostly stable, with some actually improving over the last few years. And then general Wellington perceptions, we've seen them stable compared to last year, but lower compared to pre-COVID levels. And as Stephen mentioned, we're sort of we want to add in beginning of each of these sections some possible drivers that could have an impact on some of the results we're seeing within each section. So for city perceptions, we're thinking about things like the COVID lockdown, fewer events and festivals, more closed shops, working from home, parliamentary protests, and also just general capital works and disruption. So yeah, as I said, suburban attributes. This is so we ask residents how much they agree or disagree with 4 sort of statements about their local suburban centre, and you can see. So utilisation and safety performs the best among these. Safety has come down a little bit over the past couple of surveys, whereas lively and attractiveness has actually come up compared to sort of 2018 and before. And yeah, well designed has remained relatively steady, but lower amongst the 4. City centre attributes. This is probably where I guess more of the the shifts have been over the last few years. So in particular, lively and attractiveness, which has come down, from in the sort of mid 80s down to mid 40s over the last 5 surveys. Similar, also falls for how much people agree or disagree that the city centre is easy to enjoy. Hasn't come down as much, obviously, as the lively and attractiveness rating there. While easy to get to and easy to use have remained, they've come down a little bit, but nowhere near, not to the level of the other 2. Across all these 4, though, they are, you can see that the changes between this year and last year's survey are smaller than, what we've seen between the previous 2 surveys.
Marcus, just to chip in there, you can see the significant fall off 2020, which corresponds with our lockdown, and Marcus might want to comment on, kind of how this might compare with trends in other main cities. I don't think we're alone here in terms of that, fall off from 2020, the first lockdowns, and how that's played out.
Yeah.
Can I just remind everyone too to use microphones because this is being live streamed?
How we compare better insight field, and that's actually where. And so that
Yeah, the last quality of life was in 2020, and it was actually after those initial period of lockdowns, but it was sort of obviously a lot has changed since then as well. But we did still compare favourably on lots of these cities, like these views around of Wellington versus how other residents thought of their own cities, which we can. The questions on this slide here are questions that are asked within the quality of life directly as well. So these are the more general Wellington perceptions. So as you can see, they're unchanged from last year, but just that they came down between 2020 and 2021. And these are the ones here. So we were significantly better on these both these metrics in 2020 than other main centres. And yeah, that survey was conducted in about September 2020. So. But yeah, we're waiting on. We'll know more about that towards the end of this year. We'll get more sort of updated data. And yeah, I'll just hand back to Stephen and Baz on this.
So Baz and I will do a bit of a tag team on this. What we've tried to do here is just summarise some of the work that council's really investing on, and probably our observation is that it'll take some time for that to be realised and reflected in these sort of survey results. But obviously, as we recover from COVID, there's a number of things that are planned from a vibrancy perspective in terms of events and festivals. Obviously, the reopening of St James, the opening itself of Tākina, bringing more diverse audience into the city. Once cruise ships return, that will bring a lot more people back in, Obviously, Council signed off on the economic wellbeing strategy, and the action plan has a number of initiatives in there to effectively invest and turn around the drop-off from COVID. There's half-cost public transport. Our whole pandemic response plan was to kickstart, in effect, our economy, and that was, I guess, reinforced through the LTP investment and the annual plan. The Poneki Promise, big investment of initiatives to make the city safer, and I guess when you take it in its totality, there are a number of initiatives there that will take time to play out, but we believe that will start to show up in these surveys and probably next year. But Baz.
Yeah, I was just going to say that there's a pipeline of investment. So there's decisions we've already made that will be coming online in the months and years ahead, and so we would expect, that result to start changing over time. Even if you just look at the events, right, we haven't really had any significant events for a couple of years. We've had Matariki, but we've still got All Blacks and Ireland to come, 660, big concerts are coming back, Guns N' Roses, Ed Sheeran and things like that, Les Miserables, Beervana. So we've got this big pipeline of events and festivals that we're kind of known for as a city, and they're all coming back online, and so we haven't seen them for a little while, and it'll be great to see them in the city, so hopefully that'll see some changes to the results in the years ahead. Pause there if there are any questions, or do you want us to just keep running through all the different chapters? Okay, we'll keep. We'll keep running.
All right, so next section here on urban development and transport. So this covers things like active transport and car transport, as well as some areas around development and heritage. In the active transport space, we've seen performing really well around sort of walking, but sort of ease of cycling is one area that has been declining over the last few years. In terms of car, transport, so condition of roads, parking, condition of roads been performing well. Parking, traffic, and ease of driving has been less strong. And then there's been some sort of trends related to parking enforcement over time. And then heritage, there's been as one area where we have seen a bit of change in terms of perceptions around heritage in the city over the last few years. So possible drivers around some of these results are from an active transport, or from a driving point of view, we've seen the COVID lockdowns, particularly the red light alert level when the survey was run, have a potential impact on some of those ease of driving and congestion figures. But we haven't seen similar sort of impacts for ease of cycling. So, not 100% sure on that stuff. But and then in terms of the heritage, obviously there's been lots of discussions around how and where we grow, and we think that that's going to be playing a part in views around sort of heritage in the city. So first up, active transport. So you can see there's a few figures or results there in the blue related to cycling. So the key one there being that ease of cycling around the city. That's come down over the last since 2017 there. But satisfaction with cycleways specifically has remained steady, but sort of about a third satisfied. While safety, perceived safety of cycling in the city has remained steady as well, but sort of relatively low. When we look at walking around the city, that's one area where we've performed really well over the last few years. But there has been a little bit of a downward trend in terms of ease of walking around the city over the last few years, while satisfaction with footpaths specifically has dropped back a little bit.
One of the points that we've been kind of considering or thinking about in terms of maybe explaining, that drop off in terms of kind of ease of cycling as we've invested more in cycleways is probably the raised expectations, but the delivery delay, so that people's expectations are probably been excited, but we haven't, it hasn't actually come to pass yet. So that could be one explanation, but we're a little bit unsure.
There's also growth in cycling numbers, so there's more people that are experiencing cycling around the city, and so those views are coming probably home to bear as well.
So driving and parking. So as I said, condition of roads has, in terms of how people perceive the condition of our roads, it's been high and relatively stable over that full tracking period there. While the ease of driving around the city and perception of peak traffic volumes had sort of been trending, down over the last few years, but has ticked back up between 2021 and 2022. Like we said, COVID, potentially playing a role in that on the time because of the timing of the survey, and then satisfaction with parking availability, weekend and weekday parking, has sort of jumped around a bit, but largely steady over time. And then agreement around parking enforcement being fair is one that has come back a little bit since 2018, but sort of it is relatively stable over the last 3 surveys there. So development, resilience and heritage. So you can see on the left there, that's how much people, or whether people think the council is making adequate progress on building resilience issues in the city. So it's unchanged over the last 3 surveys, but a bit lower than it was back in 2019. And whereas the heritage stuff I mentioned, it's a bit of a tricky one here because so up the top on the right, those long trend lines show the perceptions of how much heritage items contribute to the city's unique character and the community's unique character. So we have seen both of those trending down a little bit over the last few years, but they're still both relatively high, particularly the city's unique character one, the orange line. But in terms of the perceptions around the character of historic suburbs being adequately retained, we have seen that also dropping, which potentially goes, contrary to maybe the above graph. But I guess the key difference there being that one's talking about specifically about character suburbs and the other one's talking about heritage items more generally. So that difference, potentially important to people. But I guess what sums up this whole heritage space in terms of the questions we ask about it is the bottom right-hand graph there, which basically shows that when you ask people how much value or whether the amount of value and protection we give to heritage items is too much, about right, or not enough, it's evenly split across the 3 categories. So it's a sort of situation of, no matter which bucket we fall in, people, it's just contentious. People are equally on all sides of the argument. Yeah.
And just as a wrap up to that section, this is probably an area where there is an inordinate amount of work happening. So obviously we've done planning for growth already. That was a substantial exercise, and we're going through the district plan changes now. We're doing Let's Get Wellington Moving, which will improve how we move through the city. There's Pāneke Poineke, which is obviously around active transport, and there's bus priority measures work underway as well. Liam's area is also looking at a new cultural and heritage strategy. You've got work underway on the Green Network Plan. And just to dig into some of those cycling numbers a bit more, we've got more research planned for later in the year to understand the cycling behaviour in the city a bit more, in a bit more granular detail to inform our advice and the decision making at council. So that's currently scoped for, I think it's later in the year, isn't it, Christopher? Yeah, that's about right, yeah. Okay. Then there was a question.
So environment and infrastructure. So got a few different areas to cover in this one. So first up, around our use and access to open spaces in the city. It's one area that has consistently remained really high, and people obviously love getting out and about. And COVID, has had a sort of potentially a positive impact on some of those results. We also cover off some stuff around residential waste and recycling in the section, which again have both remained high and stable over the last few years. There's a bit of stuff on stormwater, or a question on stormwater management, which we have seen, dropping over the last few years, but it is actually stable between this year and last year. And there's also some stuff on street lighting, where we've seen some shifts in perceptions around the street lighting in the city centre, or in the city specifically. But yeah, so in terms of possible drivers around the stuff, we've got COVID-19 having both sort of positive and potentially negative impacts on some things. And then Three Waters infrastructure likely to play a role, particularly around that stormwater management question. And then also, the lighting one's a little bit more complicated. There could be a range of things influencing the changes we've seen there, from sort of the lighting upgrade program itself to perceptions of safety in the CBD over the last few years, and closed empty shops and sort of buildings under construction as well. So first up, the questions around sort of our open spaces. So we've seen, across the board, open spaces are well used, and use has grown over, particularly, since 2019 through to sort of 2021, with high levels of satisfaction across the board as well, and high perceptions in terms of people's view that these spaces are easy to access as well. And ultimately, the graph on the bottom, sort of right there, sums up, I guess, our connection to these spaces, and that 94% of Wellingtonians agree that the connection to nature in and around the city improves their quality of life, and that's something that's remained consistently high, ever since we've tracked it. The yellow line there sort of asks for agreement that Wellington's natural environment is appropriately managed and protected, which is stable compared to last year, but did have a little bit of a drop-off between 2020 and 2021. And as we said, potentially some things around Three Waters and stormwater management, may have played a role in that. So waste and stormwater. So satisfaction with curbside recycling and curbside rubbish collection, both pretty similar and stable and high as well. So it's really good news stuff there. In terms of satisfaction with stormwater management, that's one that up until this year, we had seen dropping, between 2018 and 2021. Obviously, we've seen it flatten off this year, which is a good thing, and it's one to, I guess, keep tracking, see where it goes. So street lighting, so you can see that suburban satisfaction with suburban street lighting has remained stable over time, but is a little bit lower than satisfaction with central city street lighting. But when we look at central city street lighting, we can see that over the last few years that has been trending down, and like I said, so potential factors into that around sort of perception of safety in the city and closed shops and the lighting upgrade program as well have sort of come up when people talk about that. And,
So in this particular area, the obviously councils will be very familiar with the significant additional investment in Three Waters, part of the LTP. And that has kind of continued over the last few months in terms of additional funding, but that takes time for it to kind of roll out and change perceptions. The further investment in future years aligned with growth is obviously something that's be part of future LTPs. There is investigations underway around green project opportunities and all urban design projects, which I guess adds to that satisfaction with connection with nature, etc. Obviously, there is, with the Ponaki Promise, lighting upgrades planned and underway, and we'll talk more about some of the other programs part of that in future slides, but that is an area that I guess should change perceptions in terms of lighting in the CBD in particular, and giving effect to Whaitua. And not all of that, of course, is, I guess, within this council's remit. Some of it is Greater Wellington as well, but all of those things combined over time will either keep those high numbers of satisfaction or turn around, particularly in the stormwater space.
So social and recreation section here. So some of our best results sort of come in this section in terms of our facilities and events, and sort of our, the opportunities that Wellington, has around recreation. So really high levels of satisfaction and really high perceptions around what's on offer in Wellington related to those things. From a city safety perspective, this is one that, has been seen before, but it's an area that we've seen declining over the last few years. But we do have some police and Hapaaki data alongside some of that safety data to sort of, I guess, show some of the other angle of it that doesn't necessarily paint the same picture. In terms of possible drivers, so around recreation, so obviously we've had COVID-19, but despite that, our facilities have remained sort of servicing Wellingtonians, and they've been satisfied with them. From a safety perspective, again, the COVID-19 element of sort of less people in the city, and other changes around sort of emergency housing in the city, and parliamentary protests, general disruption and uncertainty as a consequence of COVID-19 will all potentially play a part on some of those safety perceptions in the city centre. So to start off, consistently high levels of satisfaction with our sport, rec and community facilities and libraries. So this is across all our pools we ask about, and all our sports and rec facilities and sports fields, and all the different kinds of community halls and centres and libraries. So we ask people who have used them, and we ask them how satisfied they were with the experience they had there, and just across the board we see really solid numbers for that stuff. And from a sort of perceptions of what Wellington has to offer point of view around recreation, we see really high levels of agreement that Wellington offers a wide range of recreational activities, and also high levels of agreement that our recreational facilities and programs are easy for people to access. And you can see both of those have remained relatively stable over time and at pretty similar levels. So city safety. If we'll talk about Wellington CBD after dark, but in terms of the other three, you can see levels of safety across those is really high, and relatively consistent with previous levels. When we focus specifically on perception of safety in the Wellington CBD after dark, it's one area that has come down over the last since 2019, which is when tracking began for this question. But you can see on the right-hand side there, the police victimisation data specifically for the Wellington CBD, and our city safety incidents, which we collect or record through CCTV and the Hapaaki team. Those across both of those things, there's been no dramatic increase or real change really across the whole tracking period. For those, so, and that is the same time period that we've seen those perceptions of Wellington safety in the CBD decline.
So obviously the investment in the community and rec facilities over many years has contributed to that consistent high use and high satisfaction levels, and I think that's something to be really proud of. The work is underway, of course, to understand what facilities we need in a growing city and in that future, and that work will be back in time to inform the LTP 2024. And I guess it's, you kind of can't sit on your laurels necessarily, and that those facilities do need kind of ongoing investment to maintain those sorts of high levels of satisfaction. Obviously, we've got venues opening or reopening, which will draw more diverse audiences into the city. We've got the intensification in the city, obviously planned through our spatial planning, and needing to provide for more spaces for people to enjoy. I'll get Baz to talk about the Poneke Promise, which obviously you can see a whole lot of activity identified there. We're not going to kind of call all of that out, but I guess the comment I'd make is that it takes quite a long time to reverse perceptions, and that could take a number of years to see that investment realised and actually change perceptions. So it's not unusual to see that fall off, and it's not an immediate flick of a switch and you'll suddenly turn around those perceptions. It takes quite a lot of time and investment to reverse those trends, but I'll hand over to Baz.
Yeah, look, I think it's been 12 months now since we've kicked off Poneke Promise, so it's 12 months in the making. Obviously, there was work underway before that as well, but that's really when we had a concerted program of effort around making the CBD safer. The really important aspect of this program of work is that it's a partnership approach. Okay, so we're doing everything that we can in terms of making the central city not only safer but also more vibrant. So obviously we're doing things like increasing street cleaning, we're working on the lighting, community support base, youth hub, we're working on the design of the space and removing the toilets and all those kind of things. But the important thing is this is a partnership, and so we've got a range of other stakeholders in the city that are also playing their part. I'm not going to read all of them out, but everyone has different parts to play. So the regional council is working on transport in terms of offering bus services at different times of the night. The police are also more active in that space. So it's a concerted program of effort. But I guess the important point really is Stephen's point, that actually perceptions are reasonably easy to form and they do take time to change. And so while we're doing a lot of work, and we will continue to do a lot of work going forward, we do expect things to change in this space, but it will take a number of years before we get there. So just
to finally say that there is a bit of a disconnect between the police data of actual kind of incidents versus perception, and I guess that you could say in the end that it's perception that counts, because it kind of drives behaviours, but it's there's probably a communications element alongside that kind of reinforces or clearly identifies the changes that are being made, and our reference to a city in transition is part of that story, really.
Right, so we've got some arts and culture results here. So a few different questions around sort of perceptions of what Wellington has to offer, and council events and experiences at those and they're strong across the board. And then a result there on Māori culture in the city, and sort of its how it's recognised and visible, and the sort of role council's taking with regards to that. In terms of drivers, all the results within this section are relatively stable, but there's a lot of things in play at the moment that has the potential to drive some of those results to higher levels, which we can talk about at the end. So arts and culture access. So residents rate our art scene highly, and almost all are participating in it sort of every year. both these results have, as you can see, have remained relatively stable over time. Even in light of, I guess, the last couple of years. And then in terms of council events and experiences, so very high levels of satisfaction with the council events that we run, and also around Experience Wellington and the facilities that they offer. Really, even higher levels of sort of customer experience when people are going along to those venues. And so Māori culture in the city. So across all of these statements, these agreement statements, there's more agreement than disagreement. There is relatively high levels of sort of those neutral responses or unsure responses, which aren't included in the analysis here. But I guess that just suggests potentially a lower level of overall awareness of the work that's going on. That's it.
My apologies. Just in terms of work underway, this triennium, of course, we signed off on Ahotini and the action plan associated with that. So there's a whole program of work that is underway in regards to arts and culture, and we'll see the fruits of those actions over the next year or so. When you think about a lot of our facilities, a lot of the ones that are earthquake prone and need to be strengthened are also arts facilities, and so a lot of that's already included in our budgets and work is underway. So a lot of those facilities will be coming back online. Obviously St James most recently, but there'll be the other facilities that will be coming online in the years ahead. Another bit of work that is underway is the next steps in terms of Toi Poinaki. There's a bit of work that we're trying to get done before the next LTP, and then Te Piki Ora as well. So there's a reasonable amount of work in that space, but also just noting what Marcus just said, a lot of the data in this space is reasonably good. We also do survey work the rest of New Zealand in terms of what the rest of New Zealand thinks about us as an arts and cultural capital, and so we'll have that data and we'll bring that at a later stage.
So last section here on governance. So a few results that fall into a couple key buckets here. So satisfaction with decision-making process and some sort of statements related to the outcomes of decisions. As we've seen in previous years, these have came back or sort of declined between 2020 and 2021, and we've seen them stay relatively stable this year compared to last, but and then also similarly for questions around consultation and communication, we've seen mostly stable results between this year and last year, but some declines relative to or compared to earlier results. In terms of possible drivers for this one, I mean, there's a lot of things that could play into this, but ultimately, this last triennium has seen a lot of big decisions be made that affect a lot of people and involve a lot of sort of significant debate, and no matter the outcome of some of those things, you're always going to upset some people. So there's a potential there that's having an impact on the way people view the decision making process and the sort of outcome of decisions. I'll move on to this one. So this is I guess the key figure, the KPI one, but satisfaction with, we ask residents how satisfied they are with the process by which council makes decisions. So we saw between 2020 and 2021 it came back quite a bit. Between this year and last year, it's relatively stable. That's only sort of just outside of that margin of error of the survey. In terms of reasons for dissatisfaction, so everyone who says they're dissatisfied on this question is asked why. What are the reasons why they answered that way? And the top three reasons that came through this year were, you can see on the right hand there, so not listening to public or unhappy with consultation, and then sort of political issues, sort of infighting kind of things, and then visibility and transparency of decision making. We sort of got some wider context stuff related to this. Just had a look at what other councils are seeing from their resident survey on. It's actually on a different question, but it just speaks to how residents view their own council's performance across the country, and. Yeah, so collected a whole bunch of results from up to, between 2019 and 2021, and you can see that, as a rule, a lot of other councils are facing, in terms of, the perception of their residents, that they're seeing those decline in terms of how they view the council performance. So you can see about half have sort of declined, half has stayed steady, and one sort of had sort of increased. It's not the same question. It's the question we ask is about the satisfaction with the decision-making process, whereas this is like, how well do you think the council performs? So I put them there because they sort of speak to a similar thing, but they're not the exact same question. So it just wouldn't be appropriate to put it on exactly on the same graph. But it's because they're all different results. It's just indexing it. It's like seeing where they are relative to where they were in 2019 rather than the actual results.
It's really to show the trend.
Yeah, the trend, yeah. This one? Yeah. Yep. Yeah, right, can move on. Well, that's an apostrophe remark. Yeah. yeah, wrong place. So some questions that ask residents how much they agree or disagree with the following two, or the two statements up the top there. So how much they understand how Wellington City Council makes decisions, and how much they agree or disagree that Wellington City Council makes decisions in the best interests of the city. So again, unchanged compared to last year, but compared to back to 2019 in this case, because those questions weren't asked in 2020. You can see that they've come back. So different to that satisfaction of the decision-making process, but sort of a similar views, I guess, coming through. In terms of consultation and communication specifically, so again, we ask residents how much they agree or disagree with those three statements on the left-hand side there. So believe they have the opportunity to participate in city decision-making, believe the council is proactive in informing residents about the city, and believe they have adequate opportunities to have the say in council activities. So again, these are all relatively steady compared to last year, but have fallen a little bit compared to some earlier tracking, but not, as you can see, not to the same extent as the results from the previous two slides. And then in terms of agreement around that council information is easy to access, that's been relatively steady over the sort of long term there.
I just wanted to reinforce something that Marcus said, that in the context of the last 2-3 years, it's been a pretty tough environment with COVID, but also some big calls that the council's made. A very ambitious LTP, big levels of investment and corresponding rate increases to deal with that level of investment. So it's kind of not surprising in some ways that, when you ask a question about satisfaction with the council's decision-making processes, that's kind of the one area that people can voice an opinion based on that kind of context. But since kind of looking at the last 12 months, there's been a lot of work done in the space. Obviously, the governance review, which led to a new committee structure, and I'd say, in terms of my observation, a lot more engagement with the community in terms of public participation. We've had good levels of engagement with annual plan, long-term plan, district plan, drafts, the spatial plan, all that sort of thing. Obviously, we went through a process of updating our communication strategy with council, and to move to a more strategic focus on telling our story. Obviously, that's work in progress and a lot more work to do. We updated the representation arrangements through for the next triennium with mana whenua representation, new Māori ward. We have, I guess, moved to a more collaborative style of developing our policy and strategy, and there's a couple of examples given there. And I still remember the public gallery when council adopted Ahatini, and basically that our stakeholders were encouraging council to adopt that plan unanimously. So I think over that period of time we have moved and responded, but again, in terms of the earlier comment about taking time to reverse these sorts of perceptions, I think it's not an overnight kind of thing, and given that tough environment, I think it's probably unrealistic to expect a very fast turnaround. And in the context, we've got probably other councils with a similar kind of response and environment. I mean, one of the things we've called out there, we have obviously trying to address that question about, do you understand, or does the community understand how the council makes decisions? The very fact that we're live streaming this presentation is an example where we're opening up that transparency. We have moved to pretty much all workshops and briefings being in public. So, on the face of it, that doesn't seem like a big move, but it actually is compared to what other councils do. And all of that helps to kind of let public to understand. And I think a really good example of that recently was the issue around the town hall. Very, very clearly explained to the public what the issue was, what the sort of kind of decisions that the council needed to make, and done in a very transparent way. And so that's kind of that move that we're really referring to in terms of our communication strategy, to be very transparent, to be open, to get our story across to the public and community so that they can understand the sort of trade-offs that the council's grappling with in terms of those big decisions, the kind of investment that the council has signed up to with the long-term plan to address probably issues that have been sitting there for a while. Barbara, you might want to chip in at this point as well, perhaps.
Thank you, team. Look, I think the team has done a good job of explaining at a high level the results for every area, but also the importance of the context of the work being done to address areas where we need to do more work, and to recognise the old saying, perception is reality. So while, for example, perceptions, say, of safety in the CBD have dropped considerably, the actual data doesn't tell that story, but it is the way people feel about coming into the city, and so we've responded in a very proactive way as a council. So I think the important thing is to answer any of your questions and give clarity and tell the story clearly. So there are some next steps. As you see in the screen, we will send a media release out. Full results will be finalised and we'll make those public in July. Some of the results, as explained at the beginning, then are an input into our annual report because they are related to some of the KPIs in there, and that will be presented to councillors. And there's also an upcoming quality of life study which will show how we compare to other cities, which is due later in the year. I think lastly, I would just say, I don't think there is any doubt that the last 2 years have been very tough for the entire sector, not just Wellington City Council. It's been a tough time for local government in New Zealand, and we need to take some of these results with that perspective. So, is there anything you'd like to finish with, the team?
No, I think that's probably a good place to stop, and questions in discussion.
Okay, look, thank you all for the presentation. Just check, online, is it just Sean there or is nobody there now? Can we just check who's on there so that then I can get a list? At the moment, I've got Tamitha, Diane, Terry, Jill, and Nicola, and everybody online as well. Right, that's why it was good to see you there. Okay, right. Okay, well, let's do it. With those of you who are online, you okay if I take the ones who are here in the room first? Cool.
Sure, prioritise those people. Go on.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. Right, okay, Tam, we have maybe a couple each, and then we'll come back if you.
I've just got one, and it was on the housing questions. Would it be possible to bring the slides back up, just so I can have a look at those? And I think probably everyone might have questions relating to the slides. Yeah, I was interested to look at it had all the heritage things on it. So the section after urban development, I think it was the general development. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So that development, resilience, and heritage section, is that the key housing section of the survey?
You could.
Yeah, I was just going to reiterate that this is only part of the information that feeds into our annual report. So this survey doesn't collect all the performance information that we put into an annual report. So this survey is a pretty comprehensive summary of all the data that we have in the survey. I'm not sure if there's any actually additional housing questions that are in there, but Marcus might be able to.
There is some. I'm trying to think. There was some other stuff around, sort of like damp, dry, and sort of insulation and stuff like that. But I think I'm just trying to recall whether we asked that this year, because it's also in the quality of life, and I think we might have just left it to the quality of life.
Okay.
But basically the slides we took you through probably cover about maybe 90% of what's in the survey as a whole. So there might be a couple other results, but I can't recall off the top of the head exactly which ones they are.
Yeah, because I just wondered with this one, I was kind of interested to see that whether, in regards to housing, whether you were just surveying based on those things, which is resilience and heritage, but I think it would be quite helpful to understand people's perceptions of housing too, whether we're doing enough, whether they feel they have options, whether they feel it's affordable, like those kinds of things, because I guess these questions in relation to resilience and heritage is a very like homeowner-centric, ratepayer-centric way of asking and inquiring about housing. Those topics aren't really that relevant.
There's a lot of that. So the quality of life survey, which I've talked about a couple of times, so that being a quality of life survey covers a lot of those aspects of housing that are related to quality of life, and we've actually gone deeper on some of that stuff for the survey this year as well. So definitely some of those questions will be answered within that. But this RMS just wasn't, it hasn't, I guess, traditionally been the place where we've delved into that, topic deeply, I guess.
And it may be worth considering the future with like the Te Kāinga program, us kind of directly providing, but then I don't know, I kind of don't understand the overlap between this and the quality of life, so maybe that's covered in there too, but yeah.
Thanks, Tam. Diane.
A number of questions, but I'll just keep mine to the end, really, for around the governance and the decision making, because it is a terrible result. 12% people happy with our decision making, and there's two aspects to this. Is I am unclear why it's taken over 3 months from when the survey finished to provide us at least with a heads up of these results, and why some of the big aspects, some of the big decisions that this council has made around the district plan, the long-term plan, Let's Get Welly Moving, are not acknowledged in why people might be feeling this way.
I can certainly answer the question in terms of timing. So it's a very, very big survey. So it's not something that is simple to draw the results down on and issue. The reality is it requires a lot of checking, and there's like we said, there is literally quite a lot of questions in this space. And this is traditionally the time that we come to you to articulate what the RMS results are. So normally it's done in May or June. So this is following exactly the same pattern that we've used in previous years. In terms of the big issues, we're quite clearly articulating in terms of the context that some of those are possible drivers in terms of influencing how people answer this question. There have been some pretty big decisions that have been made as part of this triennium, everything from planning for growth, district plan, an LTP that has got significant investment in it, cycleways and so on and so on. So there are some reasonably significant decisions that have been made as part of this triennium, and as a consequence, people may have views on that could be reflected in the result that we see in front of you today.
Could I just note this yellow slide on the screen now? You can see on the right-hand side possible drivers. All of those major projects are referenced in the second bullet point.
Yeah.
The other thing I was just going to mention, that all of the kind of processes or around, let's say, district plan or around the long-term plan, they and the kind of process that we've been through this year with the annual plan, all of those have got their own consultation kind of processes attached to them. You've heard what the people think. You've made your decisions based on those submissions. So it's not as though kind of that is in isolation to this. It's part of the overall mix. So we've kind of just put this in context that when people have responded to the survey, they may well be thinking about that. But you've heard directly from those that are prepared to be involved in the process state what they think about each of those particular initiatives or processes. So.
But next steps, what are we going to do differently as elected members and as officers? Because I don't see that in next steps. That there has to be some significant change, and I'd like to understand how we go about working together to actually reverse this.
Well, I mean, my advice to the council would be that is something really for the next triennium, where we've got 3 months to run. Yes, whilst we could have workshops and briefings on that, it's really, I suppose, information that leads into that next training.
Yeah, but it also involves officers as well. So I'm really interested to see how we can go forward, but it's probably not too big a decision or discussion today.
Yeah, like I would just say that I think that the slide that says governance work underway represents a lot of work that has been done over the past year. And it's just something that we have to keep working on. As Stephen has said, happy to have a further discussion with you to hear your ideas on that.
Terry.
Thank you. I have two parts. The first one is around possible drivers, and we were asking about city safety. I just wanted to understand where the drivers came from, because you've listed emergency housing as one of the drivers for perception of feeling unsafe. And I just wanted to know if that is an assumption that we've made in analysis, or if that is something being provided to us by people filling out.
It's stuff that has come. So there are open text results within the survey, and it's whether it's people's right or wrong. It's just people's own words that they said. But yeah, I see what you're saying. Because it's quite jarring, I guess, to say something like that. That it would be making people feel unsafe, but that's the own words they're using, sort of thing.
Okay, cool. And then I was just
Sorry,
wondering.
I was going to say, Terry, I think it's probably worth noting that virtually every question is a perception question.
No, yeah, I do understand the perception.
Question.
I was just seeing if the possible drivers was something that we were like, oh, maybe it could be this, or if those things were actually listed by people filling out the answers. And my second part kind of goes off of the back of what Diane asked in terms of we've got some really fantastic stuff here about work underway, but how we are, if we've looked at the way that we're communicating with community a little differently, like did Wellington City Council have to normally have more opinion pieces in the DOM, or are we not getting out to our community service? I mean, from staff or whatever, because I know we have done those. Are we not getting out to community centres more regularly? Were there any indications about the communications falling flat? Or I guess all that stuff about transparent governance and perception, did people mention the lack of accessibility? We're in a different building now instead of on the ground floor in the middle of the city, like any of those things mentioned?
Well, one of the things that we are commencing is really a kind of, I wouldn't call it a review, but a stock take of, the engagement processes that have worked really well, building on that and learning from that and applying that as a kind of a toolkit that can inform, other engagements that the council's, going to embark on in the future. And I think that by and large, we actually do get very good feedback about our engagements from the people that are involved in that. But when you broaden it out to this sort of survey, obviously we're not reaching, kind of the full range of people, and they've got slightly different perceptions of that. But even when you do look at those results around our engagement, they're reasonably stable, actually. There has been a bit of a fall off, which might be related to COVID and people kind of not really wanting to get out there and engage. But, we have, for example, had really quite positive feedback about what we've done with the spatial plan, the long-term plan. But, we are going to do that kind of stock take in terms of what has worked well in terms of informing the future. But, that's an open question, I think, to work with elected members and bring forward your ideas about how we can improve. I mean, we do an awful lot, have been my observation within this council. It's not to say it's perfect, but, we do have various channels, various methods, and the question is, can we do more?
I've got a few kind of quick questions, but then one that's a bit more involved. How many questions are there?
There's about 200 different sort of measures, but some of those are sort of incorporated in like multi-statement kind of questions. So I wouldn't know the exact number, but they're about across the two surveys, each one's about 18 minutes long. So
it's quite a long time.
Significant amount of time.
And do we get a sense through the survey as to whether this is the only time people engage with council processes? Because I'm just thinking if this was me being approached before I was on council and wasn't maybe as engaged, my answers would be quite different as if I was someone who actually did follow and know and had actually had watched the decisions being made in real time and then ask questions. Do we get a sense of that?
I mean, I would say, like, as a whole, the sort of public that we're drawing from to answer the survey is probably a little bit more engaged than your average person, because panel, people who are willing to answer surveys generally are. Yeah. But they definitely wouldn't be, like, obviously I'm sure some of them have been involved specifically with consultations, but that's, we don't really have, there's no questions in there asking, how have you been involved over the past year or anything like that.
And then just a question around, because I haven't seen the list of the questions this time, but just wondering if we review whether we think...
Busy.
You're all right, Councillor Rush, you're not on mute.
Sorry. Got a little girl complaining about Nick having the crunchies.
Okay. We'll let you sort that one out.
Mute, sorry.
Just whether we review the questions around whether they're inclusive. There was just one around multicultural communities that maybe, might actually sort of lead people to suggest or think in a way that's,
Is that a question that I showed you today, or are you referring to an earlier question, like from a previous year? Or?
I think it might be one that's been in previously. We've asked about multicultural communities.
Yeah, we removed it. Yeah,
that's good. But and so do we go through and check and think about whether questions might, I guess, lead people to certain conclusions or to psychology behind it's quite complex,
it
isn't
is,
it?
and that's why we have researchers who are trained in that specific area, right? And yes, we do review the questions on a regular basis, and from time to time we remove them or change them. But every time we do that, we sometimes lose continuity, and a big benefit in terms of doing this kind of surveying is understanding what the trend pattern is over time. So yes, we make changes, but we're cognizant of the fact that the values in having that long-term understanding of community perceptions. Yeah,
I'm just always aware of leading questions and how you can ask a question in such a way that people are like, well, maybe I should think that because you've asked me, so maybe there's a problem.
Nicola.
It's just a technical question about the photograph of Toi Poneke. With the lease coming up, it is 2 buildings, isn't it? Or, well, can you just throw some light on my confusion, please?
I possibly could after the meeting. I'd have to go away and find the answer unless someone else knows.
Okay, I've got online, I've got Sean, Fleur, Iona.
I actually took my hand down, but okay. So
Don't have to.
the sample size, I think, was 8,000, but only 800 sort of was sampled in the end. Does that result in some sort of self-selecting bias, so that only people who have got, some sort of interest in city council business reply, which might mean that you do get maybe a certain section of the public rather than a more broader spectrum?
It's not probably... Yeah, it is explained in the full methodology, but the panel that the sample was drawn from has 8,000 members. The sample wasn't 8,000. So I think, so the response rate for both surveys was around about 30%. So, and so, to an extent, there is obviously some form of self-selection bias, which is present in all kinds of surveys, not just this one. But yeah, so we probably, for each survey, we sent to about 2,000-ish, 2,500 people, and it got about 800 responses.
Okay. And I'm just interested because the data on being okay with cycleways, I think it was, seemed to show something around about 29-30%, but only about 4% of people commute on bikes. So I'm just trying to square how we get so many people commenting on the cycleways when there doesn't seem to be that many people using them. Or is there...
Yeah, so I mean, I guess perceptions, but also people can, not everyone answers these questions related to cycleways, and they're excluded from the analysis. So technically the sample sizes for these cycleway questions are smaller because there's a high proportion of people who say they have no opinion effectively.
Okay, thank you.
Perhaps it'll be useful when you release the final report is if it's a subset of the, or actually to say how many people answered it. It'll be quite useful.
Yeah, it's in there. Yeah, there's more. Every slide has information on the sort of base, and anywhere where the don't knows are higher than 10%, it's noted, and then noted how many people were effectively excluded.
I also wonder whether it's whether there's any way of trying to get just picking up Sean's point about the participation rate. If you said to me, you're going to spend 20 minutes doing a survey, I'd have to be pretty interested in the survey to want to do it. So is there essentially an incentive, you go to a prize draw or whatever it is to encourage? Yeah,
that's in the full methodology. There is a prize draw, and obviously that's how we, in terms of going back to Jill's point about the question, updating the questionnaire, the whole goal over the last few years has been trying to remove questions that aren't needed or asked elsewhere. We can get better data in other places to make both surveys as short as possible, because we know that has an impact on response rate. But yeah, the full report has the full methodology, a lot longer than what's I've shown here.
Thanks. Okay, Fleur.
Thanks. I'm really worried about the city safety figure. Can you just bring that one back up again? That plummeting of safety in the evening, is it? Yeah, Wellington CBD after dark. But I see they've all gone down. I would like to understand how this is feeding into the Pōneke promise, because it feels to me like we really need to do something different urgently about safety in the CBD after dark. These results make it absolutely clear that what we're doing at the moment isn't enough. And I guess I'm interested in how the Pōneke promise makes sure that this evidence and data is factored into decision making. So, how do we make sure, for example, that organisations like, let's use DCM as an example, how do we make sure that they are not involved in the Pōneke promise, engaging with us, but actually doing things on quite limited funding that is seriously compromising their ability to provide the right kind of support we need in the city? And I would say the same for the police and, for other people that are in that area. How do we know, how do we create an environment which means that people can give us the feedback that we need urgently to make the city safer? Because that's an alarming figure.
Can I suggest Sahai might kind of remind us all about some of the initiatives that are underway at present, because there is a significant amount of work being done. And I think one of the key things, though, to observe is that we need to understand that this is a perception that is not necessarily backed up by events accelerating. So we are dealing with the way that people feel, and a lot of the initiatives we're undertaking are about addressing the way people feel in terms of the visible presence of police, the visible presence of local hosts, the work we're doing with the hospitality sector to provide a stronger sense of safety in the evenings. But Sahai, do you want to just touch on some of those initiatives?
I was just going to say, just before Sahai does, don't forget there were a very, very, very large number of police in town at the time.
Yes.
They just happened to concentrate at the northern end of it.
Yeah. Through you, the Chair. Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you for your comments, Fleur. Yes, those are alarming figures, and they are a reminder that there's still so much work to be done. And you'll see there from the list of achievements that we've listed there, I think in one of the slides Marcus had put together, but also I sent an update to councillors yesterday around some of, the runs on the board that we are delivering on that we said that we would, and those runs on the board are co-designed initiatives that we're developing with our partners. We are continuously testing these things. This is hard to make. There is a lag between perception and what we are delivering on the ground, and there isn't, unfortunately, a switch that we can just flick on and say, here you go, now things are safer. We are seeing that really hard positioning where we're rolling things out, and we now have to work through these things, wait for those things to make an impact, and then measure the impacts of those. And we will get there when we see the impacts of the Dixon Street changes. We'll get there when we see the impacts of Te Pākapu Hapari, actually all the things that we've listed there. But it will take time to change the track. And if we take the snapshot of where this is happening, of course, we had what was going on in February impact on those perceptions as well. That didn't help. And so, like, I'm speaking to this and justifying it when I know that these things are making an impact. They're just going to take some time to realise in the data and in the survey. In terms of where our partners could be further involved, we just had a workshop this afternoon around where are the opportunities that we need to further realise in creating harm prevention opportunities between us and enabling that those further opportunities to happen. So it's not like this is a one and done. This is a continuous conversation and a continuous program of work that will, as I said, continue to deliver us stuff that we will see the impacts on eventually. It just doesn't happen as fast as we want it to, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I guess I am really, conscious that we're doing heaps and that there's a lot of energy around it, and as you say, it's an ongoing thing. I guess I just want to see us take note of these figures instead of saying there's a whole bunch of stuff we're doing, there's all the stuff, because I think they're not just perception, it's the reality as well. Like, we know that through the figures, and we know that from what police tell us. So I guess what I kind of want to see is creating a culture where groups like DCM and the police, Take 10, Respected, say to us, this isn't enough, you need to do more, because basically how are we creating within the Pōneke Promise high expectations on the council? Because I do worry that sometimes there's just a cultural attitude to not kind of speaking out and having high expectations. So I know that we're doing a lot and that's great, but it feels like there could be a bunch of other things that we should be doing, potentially in partnership with government or police, but to really make the city safer, because it's a huge failing.
Yeah, I agree. In the year that we've been underway, there's not one point in time that we've patted ourselves on the back to say we've done enough. Every meeting that we've had at the delivery group, every steering group meeting and partners meeting, we're constantly testing ourselves to see what more can we do. So I can assure you of that. I agree these results are stark and are disappointing, and do invigorate our motivation to test out where we can enable our partners and ourselves to do more, and also joining up from an economic wellbeing perspective, figuring out where we can test and push those boundaries out to find out where those opportunities could happen. But did you want to? Sorry, Marcus. Yes.
I was just going to say that this is a moment in time in terms of a perception survey that we've done, and obviously it was done during the parliamentary protests and so on and so forth, and we'll continue to do that to understand resident perception as we go through. But obviously we're also doing some level of evaluation to understand how the programs are working, and Christopher can talk a little bit more on that, and that'll provide us with good information going forward in terms of how to structure the programs and what we can do more.
Yeah, I think you're right, Sarah, to say that, this isn't necessarily a situation where we need to be doing more. One of the things we can be doing is spending some time reflecting on the accomplishments that have been done and putting in place a proper evaluation framework. So, we're part of the Pōneke Promise group, and we're trying to help them to develop an evaluation framework that gives us good insight into how things are tracking. But there is a lag here. So, for us, I think the one thing we can do is try to get a good monitoring and evaluation framework set up so we can start seeing where things are making a difference, rather than starting anything new. That would be my personal.
Fleur, for what it's worth, as Sahai mentioned, we just had a workshop. In fact, it was the immediately previous time to this getting together with most of those partners, and actually Stephen from DCM observed, his observation was that Te Park is looking and feeling better, that there are more, if you like, constructive and positive people there, literally constructive because a lot of construction workers there, but people having lunch there, and he's observing that it is better than it was. Doesn't mean it's all fixed, but there are more positive influences, and seeing more people there with good intent. So there's work to do, but there's some positive messages there too.
Cool, thank you.
Iona, and then Laurie.
Thanks, Andy, and thanks, team, for all your work on this. I was just wondering, of those 800 people that responded, and I'm sorry because I was late coming in, do we have any idea of who they are, like in terms of age, distribution, gender, ethnicity, that kind of thing?
Yes. Yeah. There's all those questions are within the survey, so we know that.
Okay. So sorry. Is that data present in the presentation, or can we access it?
It's that data itself is not presented in the report itself or in this presentation, because it's sort of so basically. Maybe I didn't actually. I'm not sure if I said the exact words. But the survey itself is representative of Wellington City by age, gender and ward. So there's those, and then there's a few other demographic information in there. Throughout the full report, we look at each question by those demographics or those key demographics and highlight any areas where specific groups sort of answer differently on specific questions. Outside of that, we can definitely provide the demographic breakdown of the people who answered the survey, but it wouldn't. Would the goal being to just see what the breakdown is? Is that what you're after?
Yeah, well, and I'm just referring to Councillor Paul's question. Would we know, for example, whether they're homeowners or renters?
Yep, that question's in there too.
Okay, so that's super helpful, and I would agree with her that we should ask questions about housing quality. Look, my main question is, and I might need to take some of this offline because it's a bit detailed, but it's around the character and heritage, because I find this, you could interpret it in a number of ways, and so the language might not be just quite right. When it refers to heritage items, do you contribute to the city's unique character? That means listed items, does it?
The wording there is exactly as it is presented. So I guess, yeah, you're right. The wording around some of these questions is, and we have changed some of them this year. We removed a couple that were sort of quite ambiguous, and we're trying to work with the heritage team at the moment to look at, I guess, the whole suite of questions around heritage and maybe make some changes. But as Baz mentioned before, it's the cost benefit, right, of removing questions and then no longer having any tracking information.
Yeah, I'd take that point. But so would it be correct then to say the character of historic suburbs, which essentially is the character areas, right, because we don't have heritage suburbs, people are saying it's not adequately retained, and then that 2/3 of people basically think that the right amount of protection has been given or too little has been given, right? And have I read that right?
Yeah, so you're on the first point, yes, and then on the second point, you're talking about so when we ask about whether heritage items are given about right, too much or too little protection, you're saying. So yeah, so for the heritage items in Wellington, so 35% were saying they're given too much value and protection, 34% about the right amount, and 32% given too little.
And sorry, so this is the heritage items, the listed stuff. It doesn't relate to the character question next door to it?
No, yeah, it relates more to the one above it. Yeah.
Okay. Items. Okay, awesome. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Iona. And Laurie.
Kia ora. My question is around vision, or for the sake of Councillor Young, city direction. Did we have a question on if the respondents understood what the city direction was and how council was meeting that?
No.
We get feedback as part of the long-term plan, so we have our vision and our direction articulated in those documents, and we do extensive consultations when we do the long-term plan, and so we hear from literally thousands of people at that point in time. So that's kind of where we test people's thinking in terms of the direction and priorities.
Probably just to reinforce that point, Laurie, this isn't the only source of information. So, there's various surveys that are done on, use of our facilities, and just the point that Baz made in terms of those specific consultations, which are probably more relevant and more direct to those sorts of questions. So it's a bit of a kind of a judgment call as to whether or not you kind of repeat that through a more of a general survey like this, or rely on other data in processes to answer those sorts of questions.
I guess for me, that's why I'm here. So why, for me, the governance aspect should link up to why we make the decisions we make. So even if you don't agree with them, you should at least understand why we've made those decisions. But perhaps that's something we can take offline. But yeah, for me, that's a real a gap in understanding. Yeah.
Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you.
Thanks. That's all the questions. But Laurie, the point you make, and I have raised this with the team, is that I think it would be really good to think about a handful of, and it makes the survey slightly longer, but a handful of key big picture questions that we could get some reasonably coherent feedback on, and those kind of things are exactly the right kind of questions for my money. A lot of the rest of them are fairly transactional, and I think some bigger strategic questions would be good. And that also aligns, of course, with our getting the communications part of council to be more strategic as well as rather than more transactional. Look, thank you, team. Really appreciate it, and thank you, councillors, for asking some good questions.